Well, thanks, Jenna, for the opportunity, and this has been great to come and join online for you for all the sessions. Wish we were all in person. Nevertheless, let's dive into the session. What I'll do is I've broken my presentation in logical three parts. The first part and foremost is to establish my credential for this conversation, and I'll also want to show you a little bit of a repository of the logos that you see on the right are the repositories of references that I've used for this presentation, as also for my own studies that I work in this area, and these could be useful for your further inquiry. The second is I want to give you a bird's eye view of the problem from an economic, social, and most importantly, from the perspective of the continuity of our planet. And third, I will present some of the opportunities for us to consider. And these are not just do good kinds or call from our heart kind of an action, but real opportunities for business. I mean, who doesn't like to do good and still earn profits? One upfront admission from my side is that this presentation has a lot of busy slides. I erred on the side of using busy slides rather than create a clean marketing kind of a deck, as I did not want to simplify the complexities that we are facing. Or if the problems were simple, somebody would have already solved it. I will also be referring to examples beyond the displayed deck and therefore request your attention. And so let's dive in. My corporate experience really doesn't give me the right to make this presentation. But what it did was it allowed me to qualified me to understand a perspective of things that were broken and that needed an urgent fix. The issue with sustainability is that it can be portrayed in many ways. Unfortunately, the goal setting and the measurements can be quite unscientific and not truly evidence-based, and that can link an action with impact. I'm not a fanciful leftist. I'm not a green activist. On the contrary, I'm a firm believer of capitalism. The current crisis facing us is possibly the biggest one ever faced by capitalism so far. Our current systems are badly broken. Our supplies are disappearing, and so are our consumers. And for us to consume, one needs to be alive and healthy, right? In 2019, Time magazine named a 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg as their youngest person of the year ever. She created a global movement. She spoke truth to power and collected more than 10 million followers and counting on social media. In January 2019, tens of thousands of Belgian teens heeded her call. They marched every week to the EU headquarters in Brussels. On 15th March 2019, if you remember, millions marched all across the world. In September 2019, people gathered around the UN climate meeting. Young people are leading the way on climate action, and business must take note. These Generation Z kids, as they're called, will soon become the voters and buyers. Gen Z and millennials are already half of the global workforce. Unsurprisingly, critical protest movements are now coming from the employees of large corporations in the developed countries. And that's why we are talking today. Today, I stand with my feet firmly in the SDGs. At GoFar, we have business interest in high impact areas of health, education, environment, agriculture, food, livelihood. We leverage our expertise in technology, finance, and execution to impact the next billion people in the world. At the Futures Project, we work to change the global dialogue between innovation and life-centered future. Mind you, I said life-centered, not human-centered, because life must continue, human or no human. Our recent global call for innovation has attracted applications from 92 countries. This is at the Future Project, even during the COVID times. This shows how much the world is hungry for a credible dialogue and action around sustainability. The Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that you see on the screen aptly summarizes how I feel today, or these days rather. I mean, what do you call someone who is hell-bent on self-destruction by his actions contrary to all the mounting scientific evidence to the contrary? Suicidal or just dumb? Seems the extraterrestrials know about us already. Well, On the next slide, it's a busy slide, but I want you to look at two key takeaways on this slide. The first, the ones on the extreme left, it's the current cost of our economic subsystems that impacts our lives and which shows how unsustainable they are to the nature. We are currently endangering about 72% of our current life form. If this was a business, we've long been bankrupt. We have over $2 trillion of excess cost in our food, land, and ocean subsystems. This impacts about 12% of the global GDP and 40% of employment. Our rapid urbanization is running a 50% deficit annually, vis-a-vis what is required since the beginning of this century. This is creating unsustainable urban slums with horrible living conditions and deepening urban poverty. This impacts about 40% of GDP and 35% of employment. Our energy and extractives have nearly 50% of the cost in just air pollution and carbon emissions. The other issues like microplastics, oil spills, etc. are additional. Still, 840 million people across the world have no access to electricity. We cannot be building walls and going back to our prehistoric independent communities. And that's what the diagram on the right, extreme right, shows you, how intensely interconnected is our world and how interdependent we are in the current world. Our biggest strength of this interconnected world is also our biggest weakness. For example, if you take an affirmative action in any one of these subsystems, the positive impact of the same can quickly become a very virtuous circle. However, it is also true for the bad. That means any adverse or thoughtless action can quickly start off a very vicious circle. An example of this interconnectedness is this wedding cake graph. It shows, for example, how food systems are interconnected, and they're interconnecting about 5 of the major SDGs out of the 17 SDGs. Sustainable healthy food impacts poverty eradication, which was the SDG number 1, to achieve zero hunger, which is SDG number 2. This in turn drives gender equality, create decent jobs, and reduce inequality. There is a significant move to design and evaluate impact differently. Moving from earlier practiced sectoral approach, where social, economic, and ecological development areas were separate, the current transition is towards a world logic, where the economy serves the society, and hence, it must evolve within a safe operating space of the planet. Moving from the issues, let us explore some opportunities. This slide moves a snapshot of the industry-specific opportunities in the 3 critical economic subsystems by the 15 possible transition areas. The deep blue boxes, they denote a primary or a direct impact, where the light blue colored boxes are for enabling impact. And I'll want to give you some examples, maybe one example each from each one of the critical subsystems area. For food and ocean use, let us understand regenerative ocean farming. Farming seaweeds and shellfish in less than 5% of the global oceans could absorb about 10 million tons of nitrogen and 135 million tons of carbon, all with no fresh water or any other inputs. That means for every 1% of the world's ocean, this could create about 50 million jobs and produce significant amounts of food and non-food products. For example, non-food grade seaweed can be used as a plastic substitute. We could deploy a regenerative reef model that includes the whole supply chain from low-impact ocean farms to end buyers. This vertical polyculture farming system can grow a mix of seafoods and shellfish that require zero input, produce high yields over a small area, sequester carbon, and rebuild critical reef ecosystems. An example for the infrastructure, let us understand the impact of urban density that is actually falling across all the region. That means the space occupied by urban area is growing faster than the urban population. Globally, 60% of all urban space is sparsely populated. In the US alone, 15% of urban land is vacant. Low density cities with high rates of car usage, because if you have a sprawling city, increases cost by 30%. Traffic jams due to poor land mobility planning can lower national GDP by another 5% in terms of time loss, wasted fuel, air pollution, and etc. Globally, an estimated 40 billion square meters of floor space, roughly the size of Switzerland, is not used at full occupancy during office hours. And this is pre-COVID. That means with COVID, it will be even far more in numbers. Because COVID has prompted a surge in remote working and out of school education models. In our residences, this underutilization is also very high. Most middle class homes in the world have at least 1 or 2 spare bedrooms. Research shows that by better planning and utilizing vacant intercity land and by promoting compact urban growth, we can reduce our land usage by as much as 75% in the cities. And you can add to it the vertical food crop farming, where citizens can access fresher foods faster and cheaper right around their neighborhood. In Europe alone, for example, this can reduce an area equivalent to the size of Belgium by 2050. More compact urban development yields a wide range of benefits, including productivity gains and reduced health impacts, thanks to lower air pollution and fewer traffic accidents. It can also save up to 50% of the upfront capital cost on new infrastructure by sweating existing assets such as roads, sewage, and water lines more. This will cut infrastructure development cost by approximately $3 trillion till 2030 globally. The example I want to take from minerals and extractives is around a recycling practice by the automotive companies. I took Jaguar Land Rover as an example. JLR began their automotive recycling effort in 2013. Till 2019, they collected and reused around 300,000 tons of aluminium and incorporated repurposed parts into every model. This has resulted in overall 46% drop of carbon emissions in their production. In their next phase, they want to design to retire their entire larger fleets of vehicles and harvest aluminium from older cars for use in alloys for new vehicles. So let us briefly examine what's happening in the world by the government and private sector. To achieve a nature-positive economy, it requires, of course, business actions, policy, and regulations from the government. But it also needs shifts in habits and social norms from citizens. This will need persistent advocacy at all levels to generate awareness in our society. Funds are being allocated to support innovation, innovative startups addressing issues like green energy, sustainable water and food technologies, but also of livelihood and gender inequality, for example, in child development, etc. And Europe is quite leading the way here. In terms of government's COVID recovery packages, we are seeing affirmative supportive investments in alternative nature positives. Businesses are deploying their money where their mouth is. They are dramatically accelerating transition to a nature positive economy. They must collaborate better on advocacy, design, and adoption of the policy norms to protect, restore, and sustainably manage the nature. For example, if you see the investment that's going out in the technology and the sustainability market, even with COVID, is expected to be about a 27% CAGR till 2030, which is one of the highest growths in any market, any comparable market, or not even comparable markets. Most of the World Economic Forum's top 10 most promising techs have a clear environmental and social focus. Things like energy efficient water purification, enhanced nutrition to drive health, precise drug delivery, nanotech engineering, organic electronics, and photovoltaics. 9 of the biggest ESG funds in the US have outperformed the S&P 500 index last year, and 7 of them have been consistently beating the market over the last 5 years. BlackRock, Vanguard are examples of the big investment funds that are now investing heavily in the ESG space. In fact, Citibank last year announced that they had reached their long-term goal of financing 100 billion worth of activities that would reduce the impact of climate change 4 years ahead of their schedule. The market for green bonds has exploded. Global sales have increased by more than 300% in the past 5 years to reach 162 billion in 2019. The biggies are the European funds, with France leading the way. There is also clear exits from the fossil fuel investments. Investors, between them, they manage about $11 trillion in assets. For example, the Norwegian sovereign fund with 1 trillion of assets, one of the Chinese biggest state-owned investors, the French insurer AXA, and the European Investment Bank all have pledged to stop investing in coal or fossil fuel. So this is big. So what does it augur for the technologists and the technophiles in this audience? Let's take the fourth industrial revolution, which will have an impact of and very important impact. In fact, it can impact to over 80% of the business opportunities that's identified by 2030, to about $8.7 trillion in value. Some of the examples outside of these slides are in the areas of green technology, which is on a massive upswing. As the cost of building new solar and wind construction continues to fall, world has perhaps already reached a fossil fuel or a coal crossover point. In 2019, 75% of the US coal plants were more expensive to run than new renewables. US got more energy from renewables last year than coal for the first time. The forecast for oil is that there will be more left in the fields than that will be pumped hereafter. Major shift in mobility, for example, is a major change. Data science that signals that perhaps 2018 was the peak of the sales of vehicles with IC engines. Not just electrical vehicles, but commercial trucks, buses, electric rickshaws. For example, in India, about 60 million people last year used e-rickshaws every day in 2019. Daimler announced last year that they will no longer develop IC engines, and with all their R&D hereafter going to electrics. ThyssenKrupp in Germany and in the heavy industry space tested using hydrogen in manufacturing. And Gates Foundation supported productions in sun rays where they are creating heat of more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to make cement, steel, glass, and more. So in the wrapping up, I want to take this is a slide for a takeaway. There's a one slide to take away. This is a slide for takeaway. 79% of the world is threatened by our consumption, and that's an irreversible inflection point. This is a critical juncture for the future of human societies. And while we are confronting an unprecedented global crisis with COVID, we cannot take our eyes off the sustainability ball even for a minute. There's a great business opportunity for all of us to drive this change, but it is not an obvious extension of our current choices. Hence, the world needs to take a clearer commitment. I want to stop by saying that there's an old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's the call for action for all of us here today. Thanks for having me here.